Hello, greetings, and welcome to the Baller Mindframe Podcast Network. This is Crossover with DC and Ryan. I am Drew Creasman, and with me is Ryan Hammon.
Hello there.
And this is episode 1. Welcome, everyone, to the very special first episode of Crossover. This show will seek to do a couple of specific things that may be a little bit different than podcasts you're used to. Firstly, we're going to be talking about topics as in-depth as possible for longer sections of time. And the way the show is going to be segmented out, we're going to be doing crossover topics. The first segment will usually be something having to do with sports. Mostly we're going to focus on the NBA, the NFL, and Major League Baseball, but we will talk about other stuff as we feel so inclined. The second segment of the show will be a pop culture segment where we will talk about a pop culture topic of our fancy for that particular show. And then the last segment of the show will be a crossover segment where we talk about a place where pop culture and sports meet. If maybe there's a sports video game we want to talk about, or an athlete went on Saturday Night Live, or a good movie came out that we want to talk about, that's where we'll do that. And as will, I'm sure, often be the case, today we will be bucking that trend and not even following the formula I just laid out. It will probably be a common occurrence, but mostly that's how we want to try to go. Since this is the first one, what we're going to do is just do a sports topic and a pop culture topic, because I think they purposefully encapsulate what we're going to try to do here on the show, which is talk about the places where all of these ideas intermingle, hence the name crossover. So first we're going to talk about analytics, the big topic of analytics in sports across all the different sports, where we're at, where we're going with that. And then a very similar topic when we get into pop culture, we're going to be talking about how do we measure what is and isn't good in the realm of art and music and television and film, and the sort of analytics, if you will, of what makes good art. So long intro now out of the way. I'd like to throw things over to, one other thing I should mention is that both Ryan and I are Denver area bloggers. We are credentialed Rockies writers, and so this show will absolutely be filled with that Rocky Mountain bias that so permeates the national media. We will try not to stretch those muscles as we have our opportunities to do that, although you will hear some oddly Colorado-centric analogies from time to time, I'm sure of it. So all of that out of the way, let's throw it to Ryan and ask the broad question now of, where do we stand in terms of analytics? Have we gotten to the place where they are commonly accepted? Everyone knows that that's where we are, or is there still a battle to be fought over accepting analytics as a mainstream way of evaluating sports?
Well, the battle is certainly on. We hear it all the time, especially between kind of traditional media types and folks that are in the sports world in the way that you and I are. The blogosphere, so to speak. And yeah, I don't really know. It's I think we're at least to the point where even the common fan knows these things exist.
Right.
And that's probably a good threshold to have reached, because most of the debate seems to center around whether or not these things actually add enjoyment to the game. And I think that since we're at a place now where at least fans know that they exist, they can then choose to consume them or not. And the tension seems to be, for me, on the degree to which we expect the folks who bring us these sports on the TV to show these metrics to us.
Right. And as we've discussed before, there's also a major difference between the way fans and media are consuming analytics and the fact that teams themselves, the people who are using this information to have an impact on the field or the court or the rink, I suppose. Neither one of us are going to talk much hockey, probably. But
if we talk about it, I probably won't talk about it that lucidly.
If you're a hockey fan listening, you don't want us to talk about your sport, probably. We may have to have a hockey guy on at some point. But the idea that fans and the media fight over analytics is one thing, but other than the Philadelphia Phillies, aren't all the teams in professional sports using them?
God, you get that sense, and it seems like they've probably been ahead of the rest of us for a while now. And, some teams are kind of perceived to be anti-analytics, and the Phillies being the best example. But even in the Phillies case, I'm not convinced that we know exactly what they're doing. And baseball has kind of been the most obvious example of this analytics movement, but in all sports, and that we probably understand advanced metrics a little less in other sports, and that makes me think that in those cases, the teams are even further out ahead of the rest of us. Because why wouldn't these teams be using these things for years? Because that seems to be where they're most helpful, right? Is actually like getting the best product on the field, regardless of how the rest of us may enjoy that product or what numbers we tap into to enjoy that product. The teams, it's literally their job to create the product. So why wouldn't they be using this stuff?
Right. Why wouldn't you want to have all the information possible available to you? So my question then, what is the ultimate goal of having these analytics? Is it just to strip aside our own biases? Is it to strip aside things like clutch or something like that guy's a good leader or he's a good clubhouse presence, he's a good locker room guy? Is it to diminish those things, or is it just another tool in the toolkit?
Well, so first of all, I don't think we ever can strip away our biases, right? We may pretend to, but I don't know if we ever succeed at that. And one of the interesting things about analytics, I think, is because one of the funnest things to do in all sports is to argue about who's the best, or
that's what these numbers are actually for.
Right.
Who's better, Peyton Manning or Tom Brady?
Right. Or who should we sign next year?
Right.
That's kind of that's one of the funnest things to do in sports, and analytics help that argument. But one of the interesting things about because there is still this open debate about what the analytics really mean or how accurate they are, is that you can still have that debate between an analytics inclined person and someone who isn't, because then the person who isn't can still say, well, yeah, I know what your math says, but I don't believe in that,
Right.
or I don't, one interesting things about analytics also is that most of the best ones, for better or for worse, and probably for worse, but they're hard to understand, right? They're hard to unpack, and whenever you don't know how this number is gotten to, then it's hard to trust the number.
Right. And sometimes even on top of it being complicated, sometimes we literally don't even have access to the information. I found this when looking through ballpark factors. There are some ballpark factors in baseball that are just determined on the number of runs scored in that particular environment, which seems to me to be a too far blunt of an instrument.
Right.
On the other hand, there are others where they say, well, that's not how it's formulated, but we don't actually know how it's formulated because that information isn't publicly available.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So what are things like StatCast and I forget the name of the equivalent in the NBA. I've got my baseball brain on that.
SportsView?
Yeah, SportsView. They've been doing that for a little while now. And
well, the great thing about something like StatCast, and it'd be interesting to see a basketball equivalent, although maybe the screen would get too busy too often. But the StatCast is just the most aesthetic representation of advanced metrics. You've seen you actually see the path that the player took, and it heats up when they're moving fast, and you see the ball highlighted. Oh, so hockey reference. I remember I once saw a hockey telecast, and I think if I understand it right, most hockey purists hate this, but I think it was ESPN, but they were highlighting the puck. Right?
Oh, sure.
So you could actually see this little trail
because it's the only way I can follow the game.
Anyway, so the advanced metrics in baseball, and StatCast in particular, will make this beautiful thing on the TV screen in ways that no blogger can make, weighted runs created plus beautiful in a blog post. And so it'll be interesting to see what StatCast does to the acceptance of analytics and how conversant the average fan becomes in these things. And again, I don't know in the end whether that's going to make analytics any more or less useful or palatable to it seems like most people have already made up their mind, doesn't it?
It really does. That was going to be my next question to you is have we gone too far in terms of being in one camp or the other? I have a story that there's been several months now since this happened, but Keith Law and I got into a little spat on Twitter. And Keith Law doesn't know who I am, nor should he. There's absolutely no reason why Keith Law should know who I am. But we were arguing about the idea of lineup protection. And I was saying to him, essentially, you're too narrowly defining the parameters by which lineup protection could exist because you need it to exist in a number. So the problem you're having is if you can't qualify it, then it's not even worth discussing. And then he said, yeah, if you can't qualify it, then it's not worth discussing. Is that going a little bit too far? Didn't we have the inability to measure pitch framing 4 or 5 years ago? Didn't WAR not exist 10, 15 years ago?
Right.
And weren't those things still worth discussing then?
Absolutely. Maybe this is, an easy answer, but like most things, whenever you have these type of debates, usually the folks on either extreme are both wrong, right?
Right.
In the end, like a history, you look back, normally history will reflect that the extremists on either end were wrong.
Yeah, we got a comment. I got a comment on an article I wrote recently that said, you and all your fancy schmancy numbers, the real question is, can he play?
Yeah. Right.
Just, can he play?
So, yeah, scouting has a place, the metrics have a place, and I think most people that use both, and certainly the teams themselves would tell you that both matter, right?
Right.
And I guess, to the extent we as fans want to kind of mimic or come close to the same level of understanding that the professionals in the game have of the game. Mm-hmm. And maybe we can talk about that in the morning, whether or not that's even important.
Right.
But, for fans who do want to understand the game as much as possible, it seems to me they ought to kind of take the same approach the teams themselves do, all of whom, even those analytically inclined, still have scouts. They still care about how toxic their clubhouse is.
Sure.
And the player, you mentioned like something like lineup protection. The players themselves believe this exists, and there's no way that I would ever feel comfortable like assuming they're so deluded that they don't know what their own approach is at the plate.
This guy's getting paid $20 million because he's so good at this game that he's worth that much money, but he has no idea what's happening right in front of his face.
Exactly. Yeah. And plus all the psychological stuff. If player X goes to the plate and he feels like he's being protected by this quality hitter that hits behind him, the very fact that he believes that means it matters.
Right.
Whether it plays out in the numbers or not. And and that's the other thing, just any good scientist would admit that we don't know all the things we don't know. And that someday we're going to get to the point where we know about things that we can't know about now. So to ever say definitively that anything that can't be measured doesn't matter seems short-sighted to me.
Right. Not to pick on Keith Law, and I actually do think he came back like he cares if we're sitting in Whiskey Bar. Oh, I should have mentioned that earlier. He cares we're sitting in Whiskey Bar in lower downtown Denver talking about Keith Law and a Twitter spat.
He doesn't need you or I.
No, I think he's doing just fine. But to his credit, he did come back the next morning and say, what I should have said was not if it can't be qualified, but if it can't be detected, then it's not worth discussing, which again to me was that's an entirely different conversation. Sure, that's where we get into the idea of what an eye test isn't. An eye test a form of detection,
right?
Or going into a clubhouse and seeing that a guy has been a poison or that he's not getting along with the teammates. I got to spend some time in the Denver Nuggets locker room this last season right before Brian Shaw was fired, and it was pretty obvious that those guys didn't really like each other all that much in that locker room,
Yeah, and kind of the uptick in quality of play immediately after Shaw was let go suggests that, right? But that's one of the things that it'd be interesting, and we'll probably never get there in this particular. But maybe I shouldn't say that. But to actually be able to measure the impact of a toxic locker room, because there's all kinds of anecdotal evidence out there that it matters, right? But then you've got the whole chicken and egg thing. Well, winning means that you have chemistry,
right?
Not the other way around. And I read someone on this exact point, and I think the way that he, I wish I could cite the person because it was a good piece and a good way to talk about it, but he said it's okay if the arrow points in both directions, right? That chemistry leads to winning. It's okay for both those things to be true and still to acknowledge that it matters.
Right.
Even if we, again, can't measure the impact in any quantifiable way. So
is the goal of analytics to be able to measure everything, and is that even possible?
Well, I would like. See, I did. I was saying like a minute ago. I want to say no. Of course, we'll never be able to measure this, but
the future holds all kinds of possibilities.
And whether or not that's a good thing. I mean, so one of the critiques of analytics, it seems to me, is that this adds no value to the game. It doesn't make it any more enjoyable, and it seems like that's a little too broad a statement to me. I mean, of course, for some fans, that's true.
Sure.
Others want to enjoy baseball in a different way. And both people are right. I mean, I've got fans who love baseball just as much as I do. Well, maybe almost as much as I do.
Almost.
But they couldn't care less about any of this stuff. And if they want to care about pitcher wins or whatever, like that's not, it doesn't make them wrong or me right if our goal, and it is just to enjoy the game. It's okay for people to want to not know about these things.
All these extra things.
We can both enjoy the game and sit in the stands together and be a perfectly harmonious thing. I don't. So that's the part of me where I wonder why this has to be a battle in the first place.
Why it has to be dichotomous. Doesn't it feel even to some degree that there's a gatekeeper aspect of, we were talking about before, if you don't know how the stats work, if you don't know how they're formulated, but someone comes to you and says, say, for example, you're a young bearded writer and you claim that Troy Tulowitzki is better than Mike Trout. For example, hypothetically, say somebody in this room had done something like that.
Right.
And a bunch of people come to you with the big WAR number.
Mm-hmm.
Boom. WAR.
Definitive. Game over.
Yeah.
Right.
Mike Trout's WAR. Big fat 9. Big fat 10. Troy Tulowitzki 5'6". What are you talking about?
Right. Well, and so that's where, it seems like, I mean, we, again, both have our own biases. And I remember I was inclined to agree with you on that one in particular. But, I mean, I could probably have brought to bear analytical firepower, sabermetric firepower, if we're talking about baseball, and the opposition can do the same thing.
Sure.
And we could still never, because as much as WAR in particular purports to be the cumulative statistic, the cumulative measure of value, it isn't. And even its makers would say that it's not, that it's one of the tools we have in our toolbox, a metaphorical toolbox to support one argument or the other. And I think that's where, so like when we have this debate, the analytics folks, the most pompous among them would call the other half ignorant or naive or whatever.
Right.
And the fan who doesn't care for these things would, of course, the sabermetricians or the analytics guys in all sports are the nerds.
Right.
Daryl Morey.
The elitist, nerdy, smart. Yeah.
It was Charles Barkley who called out Daryl Morey for being a nerd, and that the nerds were ruining the sport.
Right.
And so whenever we resort to these ad hominem extremists, I don't feel like most fans are that way, but maybe that's because I like to think I'm not that way. But are most fans that way? Is it dichotomous?
I hope not. One of the things I will say as someone who's been critical of some ways in the of the analytical movement, I think part of it has to do with the fact that I feel a little bit like they are much more the establishment now than they ever were in the past, and they still sort of act like the victims. Nobody is accepting us. This is still 2002 or something. We're in the post-Moneyball world now. But I will say that I hope we've gotten past the notion that if you didn't play professional baseball, or if you didn't play professional basketball, or if you didn't play professional football, then your opinion on the matter doesn't matter. I wish I could phrase that sentence better.
All right.
Damn you, English! But yeah, my favorite thing about analytics and a character like Bill James is that he proved that you can think hard about the game, be a nerd, be that guy, and actually understand it at a level that maybe even people inside of it can't because they're too far inside of it. So to move us a little bit deeper into this conversation, we were talking about war a minute ago, and to meet up with the title of the show, Crossover, let's talk about the differences between the different sports and the different challenges that exist in creating analytics and understanding analytics. We mentioned, baseball is obviously where it's taken off the most, but the NBA, the NFL, obviously hockey does, even though we don't know a ton about what's going on there. Is it just so much easier for baseball because it's a series of individualized events and we're never going to get to the basketball thing? It's too fluid?
I think that's right. Although, because, as you said, baseball is different from the other sports in that, officially baseball is a team sport, but in the end, it really is a series of one-on-one matchups. And, sometimes the NBA is that way too. But, I mean, I think it is the fluidity. I think teammates have a more profound impact upon one another's both performance and their statistical performance. And of course, sometimes that isn't the same thing. And, same with football. Especially something like, what a running back produces. And then this is something I think even before the analytics movement came along, I think everyone kind of intuitively knew this, is that, the yards per carry, for example, a common number that a lot of football fans are familiar with, but that has so much to do with what the offensive line does, what the play calling's like, all that stuff, and I hate now I hate that we happen to be in Denver because they also happen to be the best example of this. But those Denver teams, especially starting 10 years ago or so, those Shanahan teams, the idea was it doesn't matter. You can plug anybody in that system.
Put Gary in the backfield, he's going to rush for 1,000 yards.
Right, and he did.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, and that happened year after year, and then it kind of became like a cult of Shanahan. But a great example of clearly when the one variable, right, to get mathy is the thing changing and everything else is constant. But that one variable, you can plug anything in there and you get more or less the same results. That's when you know that variable isn't significant, right?
Right.
And so I think that was kind of the example back then that a lot of people pointed to saying, it's not Barry Sanders was kind of his own master in that way. And I would love to have had, better analytics then because his yards per carry seems even more impressive in retrospect, it seems. But all of that stuff, again, it's harder in football than it is in baseball. And all the other sports, because the interaction between teammates is so much more important.
Yeah, and I wonder in those games, how much do we know really? How much are these stats informing us, and how much are they just sometimes confusing us? I remember when during the playoffs a year or two ago, when Carmelo Anthony, and a fun drinking game for the podcast, by the way, every time Drew brings up Carmelo Anthony, because this will not be the last time, but he hadn't had an assist in a game and a half or a statistically significant amount of time where it was a talking point on all of the shows that particular day as they were going into the next playoff game. And I watched those games, and dude's got to make shots for you to get an assist. He wasn't not passing the basketball. And so I do wonder sometimes how much stats are used to inform, and sometimes how much stats are used as a cherry-picking, convenient way to continue to paint a narrative that you want to paint.
You're right. Well, and I think, maybe this was something we were going to get into. So whose responsibility is it to fix that? What do we expect of our broadcasters, of our journalists when it comes to this type of stuff? Is it the broadcaster's responsibility to quote the fact that Carmelo Anthony's had 2 assists in a week, without then also explaining some of
his
the
teammates are shooting 22% from the field,
right? And so what do you think is the responsibility they have in that respect?
I think that we need to be focused much more on a constructive conversation. I think it's a philosophical difference that far too much of the media, and it's not just the mainstream media, I see it just as much in the blogosphere as I do anywhere else, that we are focused on painting the most extreme story. I mean, I get caught up in doing it. I don't claim to be any different. The other night I wrote a headline, Tyler Matzik, most inefficient game in 15 years of Major League Baseball, which is the most aggrandizing way to phrase such a thing and makes it look maybe worse than it was, maybe not. It was a pretty bad start. But I do wonder, our innate desire to make what we're talking about be important or matter. And then, like we talked about earlier, everyone has their own biases. If you're already a disbeliever in Carmelo Anthony and you happen to see he has no assists in however long, and then you know his teammates are bad, but you don't even really bother to inquire. I think that's what it is. I think less than a purposeful desire to paint a narrative, it's just being okay when your narrative is confirmed and then not checking out anything else. If I had one thing, I wish that the mainstream, any media, like I said, the blogosphere too, media people that cover sports, I wish, we've been talking a lot about the toolbox, the toolkit for analytics.
Right.
I wish every statistic came with another statistic. Like we were talking about, or, you know, if you're going to bring it up, at the very least, acknowledge some other aspect of what might be going on there. I had a debate recently with a blogger about catcher framing. Mm-hmm. And I said, you know, the way we measure catcher framing is the number of balls that a pitch FX measures outside of the strike zone that were called strikes.
Right.
But the Y is not measured. Well, there are any number of things that could be causing that pitch to be called a strike. Maybe the umpire called it because he had a wide strike zone that day.
Right.
Maybe he called it because the pitcher on the mound has a good reputation and he thought it was there.
Big factor.
Or he's been all over the place. He has a bad reputation. The umpire was fooled. Maybe he just missed one. Maybe it had nothing to do with the way the catcher framed the ball. So
shadows across the field.
Any number,
environmental factors.
Yes, any number of other things it could be. And I think far too often we tend to assume, oh, this number is this thing because this. And it's RBI is the perfect example of it. And statisticians will love this part of it, because the reason we don't like RBI anymore is because it does that. It tells a potentially inaccurate story. You can only knock in as many guys who were already on base, which you had no control over. But catchers don't have control over the umpires and what they do or do not call strikes. Maybe a margin, a little bit, a tiny little bit. How much do they really? Carmelo Anthony can't make Iman Shumpert hit a jump shot.
No. And I think, you know, there is, I think given enough time, a broadcaster or a mainstream media member could articulate that if they were so inclined. But part of this is where I guess I cut them some slack, is because usually the bigger story, which is also the more accurate story, the more truthful story, is also a much longer story, because sports, like life, is complicated. And so if you really want to paint the entire tapestry, it
5
takes
reasons
time.
Your team sucks.
Right. And like, so maybe, you know, the folks who write for the brick and mortar newspapers have the space to do that, but most of them don't. The broadcasters don't. And so for them to kind of, again, tell the entire story, there starts to become some practical limitations, where I think maybe where sabermetrics, why sabermetrics has flourished the way it has in the blogosphere. And that's why, like, I hope that the reason that they don't kind of build in these more truthful things about the sport into their writing or into their broadcast is just because they don't have the time, and it's not because they think that this is geeky or stupid or uncool or somehow like, because you kind of get that sense, right? When they do when they do take a little bit of time to bring something a little bit more sophisticated in the conversation, it's always like, well, this is what those pointy hat guys, this is what the internet folks say, and I hear this even from people that I honestly respect in the industry, and my sense is that they're just kind of creating they're buffering in a way that I wish they wouldn't.
Right. As a fan of comic books growing up, as somebody who was into Spider-Man and Wolverine before anyone knew who Hugh Jackman was, I totally get that. And I wonder if analytics will have that moment, that because comic books totally and completely did. When I was growing up, even not that long ago, when I was in high school, geez, I'm getting old now, but 10 years ago, oh my goodness, 10 years ago when I was in high school, it was not cool to be into Spider-Man and Batman and Superman and stuff. And now it completely and entirely is. I wonder if and when analytics will kind of reach that moment, because I agree with you. As a critic of this stuff, that bothers me when you see the broadcast and someone like Charles Barkley goes, "Oh, here come the numbers."
Yeah, that right.
Schmarkyberg, like, come on, man. Like I just in general, I don't like the idea that we've disincentivized being smart.
Right. Which, humans have done this for eons, so maybe this is just like a microcosm of that. I mean, I'm hopeful, and I think we will get to a place kind of like you described. If we're not right on the cusp of it, I think we'll get there eventually. In the meantime, my kind of base standard, what my minimum expectation is to at least not be aggressively wrong. Like, you don't need to tell me, you don't need to bring in all the great stats that tell the best story, but you at least need to not be wrong. So, I just want I want the broadcasters to. It's okay, even like, I was joking about pitcher wins, and that's kind of the low-hanging fruit of the folks in our community to pick on. But even that, like, I'd be okay if the broadcaster mentioned pitcher wins, because that is something that happened. We do have a standard for pitcher wins. This thing happened. I just don't want that to be like the proxy for this pitcher is really good.
Right.
He did this thing, and that's a function of both being good and luck and all these other external factors that he has no control of. But this thing did happen. Mention it, but don't try to infer that means he's good.
Right. I was going to maybe skim over this, but you segued perfectly into it. So I do want to ask that question then, because this is an issue I often have deep inside the analytical conversation, which is predictive data versus measures of production. Like you were just talking about, a pitcher win is a thing that happened. That's an occurrence that is what it is. It means a very specific thing. An RBI, another thing. That's a thing that happened.
That is a thing that happened, yeah.
Whereas things like BABIP, FIP, we need to get back into other sports, stupid baseball people, QBR, PER, these are not things that happened. Mm-hmm. They are theoretical projections of what should have happened.
Given underlying talent.
Right. Or what probably would have happened. My big one, I've talked about ballpark factors a lot, but in a neutral environment or in a neutral situation, what could, should, or would have happened. But if you and I are having a debate about who should be the MVP in the NBA this year,
right,
and you're bringing up PER, aren't you measuring what a guy theoretically could, should, would have been, versus if I'm saying he got X points, X assists, and X rebounds a game, I'm saying this is what dude did. Dude done did this.
Dude done did. Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, well, I think it depends on the argument you're having, right? Like, so if you want to talk about who was the best at doing the things that got good over the last season, then you use one set of stats. And if you want to talk about who's the best, or again, like which free agent should our team that we love
for the next 3-4 years,
then that's when, and I think that's where the breakdown gets, where we'd all be better off if we understood the difference, whether you're passionate about advanced stats or not. It's to understand, which stats tell you what thing.
Right.
So, if you want to have an argument about who had the best year, then you use one set of stats. If you want to have an argument about who's going to have the best next years, and so therefore who should we sign, or even who's the most talented, because, that's also a different question than who had the best year.
Right.
Then you just use a different set of stats. And I don't really... As someone who has embraced advanced statistics, because I like to understand these games as much as I can, I still will always had one foot in the other camp also, where sometimes I just like to sit back and enjoy the artistry, and I don't really care about who's the best.
Right.
I just want to sit in my beer as I watch that 28-footer drain, So
and you want to see the journeyman win the game,
right? Exactly. Yeah. And so I just kind of like the broadcaster thing. If people are going to use a number, I just want everyone to understand how it's being used. Is all. And there's a place for both.
Right. And that actually, I think, segues us quite nicely into section 2 of the podcast. We made it all the way to section 2. If you're still with us, congratulations. You have an attention span. And in this section, we're going to talk about something that's very similar, but in a different world, a different universe. And that is the idea of snobbery inside of art, entertainment, measuring. You know, one of the things we do at Baller Mind Frame is we cover not only sports, we cover pop culture. And if you're going to write an article about a TV show, a movie, a piece of music, whatever it is, just like with anything else, you've got to have your reasons, right? The analytics in sports, the numbers, these are all reasons to make an argument. Ultimately, we're building evidence for a case, right? So let's start at the very fundamental level in this, because I have had this argument, I'm sure, over 1,000 times in my lifetime. Is there something objective, measurably objective, maybe even in a similar way to analytics in sports, about art, film, music, TV, dance?
No.
I was going to say, Ryan Hammon, would you like to solve that problem for us, please? Would you like to solve the puzzle? Oh, geez, I'm dating myself with these references. This is terrible.
Right. No. You think there is?
I think there is an element of objectivity inside of this realm. And the reason I believe that is because, I'll go ahead and let this cat out of the bag, I am a musician. And being a musician, one of the things the very first thing you learn is that you suck. You're terrible at this. You're bad at it, and you have to get good. And in order for that to be true, there has to be a difference between bad and good. A very basic, fundamental, I can or I can't play the guitar, I can or I can't sing, I can or I can't act, which may sound...
But all right, I don't want to derail.
Jump in there.
But so you think there is an answer to that question?
I don't think there is an answer to
that.
But
I can or I cannot dance, or I am good or am bad at singing.
What I would like to say is I think there is a better and a worse, and it depends on the kind of thing you're talking about. I think it gets very complicated and nuanced, but I do fundamentally believe that there is a connection between getting better at something, understanding something deeper, doing the required work like we were just talking about with sports, to understand why different tools, why different mechanisms are used in certain ways. And yes, I believe that you can watch a movie or listen to a piece of music and in two different ways, and we can break this down if we want, essentially say, is this good compared to other things that are like it?
So just to count something you said, so like, you're getting better at this thing as you try to, work on your craft. How do you measure your betterness?
Sometimes it's sheer technical things. Like in sport, there's an actual technical way to swing a baseball bat. There's a technical way to shoot a jump shot.
Vladimir Guerrero was incredibly successful. Yeah,
and Bob Dylan was a singer.
Great, exactly.
And so, welcome to Crossover, ladies and gentlemen. But precisely, that is exactly. There can be wild variations on the quote-unquote proper method. But if you're singing a song, you can miss the note.
Right.
You can hit the wrong note, the note you weren't trying to hit. That's a technical skill.
Sure.
You can try to strum a guitar and nothing happens. If I handed someone who's never played the guitar before, they couldn't make it make a sound. That's a technical inability to achieve a goal.
Yeah, like maybe this is about where you're going to go with this. Like hitting the wrong note, for example. On a particular type of song, that might actually turn out to be a good thing, right? If you're trying, like if the underlying message of the song is like vulnerability or anguish or whatever, if you miss a note at the right time, it actually adds to the art, right?
Theoretically, that is possible, though, and this is why the goal, the very word that is at issue here that makes it different from sports is intentionality. Because in sports, the intention is always the same. If you're shooting a jump shot, your intention is to fucking make it, right? Yeah. Right? If you're swinging the baseball bat, the intention is to hit the baseball. It can be difficult to discern the intentions of an artist. Did they miss the note on purpose, and was it for a reason? Or did they just miss the note because they couldn't hit the note? If you can't hit the note, and you missed the note, and you were trying to do something else entirely, maybe you wander into a happy accident, but 90% of the time, it's going to sound awful. It's going to feel awful. Right. You're not going to like it. I've missed notes on stage before. I've had my voice break into a microphone that was blaring loud stuff. It doesn't feel good. It's not quite the same as saying, oh, I'm playing this jazz piece and I'm doing this right. big, expensive, crazy ass, solo, and then I'm going to throw in a blue note that no one's expecting.
So one of the things that maybe help answer all these questions, or better understand them at least, is to figure out what the goal is, right?
Right.
So what is the goal? Is the goal to create something that you believe is good based on your standards of excellence? Is it to sell records?
Right.
Which maybe, getting into analytics, is that a proxy for the degree to which you've entertained?
Absolutely.
So is that and I understand, kind of answer my own question. Maybe the goal is different for different people.
Right.
Right. So, what would your goal be in particular?
And that's where the word snob often comes up. Because I've always felt like there should be a distinction between art and entertainment. If your goal is to distract and entertain, or to be background to whatever, or to just provide a place where people can not think, specifically to not think. Not that there's anything wrong with that, and we'll get more into this here in a minute when we talk about our own guilty pleasures. But when you're specifically creating a space for absent-mindedness, I think that is entertainment. Whereas when your goal is to challenge or question, or to show people something, or to express a thing you yourself actually feel, that is art. So if a producer wrote a song that was already written in the 60s, but he changed some of the words around, and then he moved some of the chords around, and he slightly changed the key, and then he gave that to a 17-year-old girl to sing, and then she sang it, and they made a bunch of money. To me, that's entertainment, because the intention and the goal, quite clearly the entire way through, was to make money based on a thing they already knew, a proven formula.
Yet there is
Dr. Pepper.
Yet there is mastery and skill in that process you just described.
Absolutely.
I mean,
there
so
is.
when I think about pop music, and most of my musical interests are not in that realm, but there are pop acts I like and pop songs I like.
Sure.
And so when I look at those acts, I mean, for me, I look at that as not just the person, that 17-year-old that would be, on the album cover, but it's a team of people that did that.
Sure.
And maybe this is rearranging existing chords, but I mean, there aren't that many chords, right? I mean, we have a finite resource of chords.
Right.
And so there's only so many combinations anyway, right?
Absolutely
and
true. Oh, and I use common chord progressions all the time. I'm not standing on that pedestal.
And the marketing that goes into a pop act, all that stuff takes skill and effort. And so I think of that as a team effort. So you put a Ariana Grande song out there. I don't see that as her. I think she's a very important part of that.
Right. But
it's a team that created that product.
Right.
And see, the thing is, talking about different artists have different goals, like you said, but they all exist in the same space, right? This is the music example. It's the music industry. They come in the same mediums.
Yep.
Yes. I can play either on my iPod.
Sure.
They both come over the airwaves. It's all in the same space.
Right.
The goals of the individual artists might be different.
Right. And so that's when I wonder, okay, so we have things, you mentioned, we have record sales, and that can oftentimes tell us what's the most entertaining, what's caught on, what's catchy, what's in with the kids. I used to be one of the kids, damn it. But so my question then is, if we're writing articles, which I've done on pop culture here with the Ball and Mind Frame Network, or if we're giving awards, if we've got the Oscars and the Grammys and the Emmys, what's the point of all that hoopla if we already have record sales to tell us what's popular? Isn't theoretically the goal of each one of those things to say there is some other way in which we can value what is good? Let us ask the people who make the thing because they might understand the craft and getting better at it themselves. Let us ask them, so that way we have a separate place where we can say, here's an award. Maybe you didn't sell the most records, but you did make the best music this year.
Well, one of the things I like about like the Oscars, the Grammys, is that these are industry folks measuring themselves,
right?
And to the extent that this is actually true, that it is a true, pure, and there aren't politics,
like having athletes vote for all-star games,
right? Politics both for like internal consumption and external consumption. I mean, sometimes you want to try to send a message by the people. So there's all kinds of reasons why it isn't actually as pure as how it might in theory, how it's supposed to work. And so I value those awards shows and awards in general for pretty much that reason, because it does interest me to know which artists their own peers consider to be the best. But I still don't think of that as like, that's not the objective.
Oh, absolutely not. I would never hold up the Grammys and the Oscars and say, this is definitively, these are the best ones.
The way some people misuse WAR, real plus minus.
Precisely.
So, so I can't, so me as an individual, I can't decide what is objectively good. You can't either, because your goals might be different than someone else's.
Sure.
The industry can't either, because of all reasons we just described. So I'm still waiting for who has defined this thing that is the objective good version of music.
Right. And I think that's what's so difficult for someone in my position, because it's so much less about saying, here's the way to be a good artist, because that's an absurd proposition. I think more, and the reason people don't necessarily want to phrase this way is because it sounds so mean-spirited. I think the thing people hate most about an art snob like me or about an analytics snob and any other thing is that we're telling you the thing you like is bad, or
you're doing it wrong.
You're doing it wrong.
Right.
You don't like the right thing, or you don't understand this properly. And I totally and completely understand that. On the other hand, I do think this is about not defining what is necessarily good art, but what is bad art, or what is not even art to begin with. One of the things that's always struck me is very peculiar about this problem is I think every human being I've ever talked to in my entire life has admitted that music can have a powerful impact on them. It can remind you of a thing that happened when you were a kid or when you were in high school, your first love, your first whatever. Absolutely. That it can move you to tears, or that it can make you feel joy. It can fix your day, or it can be a comforting friend. And music has this power to do all of these amazing things. So why doesn't it have a power to do not so amazing things, potentially nefarious things, potentially things like making you feel bad about yourself, young teenage girl, and your body image, so that you will go out and buy shit that you do not need just to try to cure this problem we gave you? When do we get to the place where we say sometimes music, because it's built so intrinsically into us, and films, TV, art, there have been a lot of conversations over the years about does television and film desensitize us to violence, and I've never totally bought into those things too, but I do think we tend to act like, oh yeah, these things can be massively inspiring, great, wonderful things that touch us in our very souls, but then they can't, if they can get in there to do good, they can get in there to do bad.
Yeah, so you dated yourself a few times, like, so I'll date myself, so like when I was in high school, it was Marilyn Manson, right?
Right.
And, we, including here locally, we had some tragedies that were blamed on him in particular.
Right.
And, or else, again, I was, these things are still around, so this wouldn't necessarily date me. But like, first-person shooter game.
Sure.
But I guess actually when it was kind of in my wheelhouse, it's like the first Grand Theft Auto. Which was visceral in a way that, like, because you're on the streets and you're interacting with, like, theoretically real people.
Right.
And you have this sick freedom within this game to like engage all these horrible acts consequence free,
right?
And to the extent that then gets carried over into real life, and yeah, on the subject of music, like that's hearing you go through that is a I don't know, that did, like, I get what you're saying, like that's a persuasive argument to like the degree to which music can actually harm people's kind of self-image and then motivate them to do unhealthy things,
right? So
that's kind of a different question, right? Because we're talking about the value of the art. Now, I mean, if we want to get into like the the impact on society. Isn't that a different conversation?
I think so, but I think it's part of the same conversation, because I think there are really two ways in which music or movies or TV or whatever can be bad. And music is the one I'll stick with because, like with baseball and Colorado stuff, it's our closest analogy right now. But the thing about music is the two ways is you can be bad technically, like we discussed, and most of that stuff doesn't even make it onto the radio. Katy Perry, Taylor Swift, whoever Justin Bieber, whoever your least favorite pop icon is, they can play. They can play better than me, almost certainly.
Well, and they have a skill just as an entertainer. You said that, which is definitely a
moving around
thing.
a stage, engaging with people. I don't do any of that. that shit is far beyond me. But there is a minimal level at which you've got to be able to hit the notes, do the technical stuff to get that popular. But then the other thing is the really ambiguous area that we find ourselves in, which is what is the value of the music? What is the purpose of the music? And for me, the reason why that stuff is worse than just mediocre, and that's another thing I think we got to get more into as a society, is understanding there are many different levels between good and bad, great and terrible. Most of the crap you hear on the radio is mediocre. It's just okay, and it's been well produced. It's probably elite produced and mediocre music.
Right, that seems fair.
And some of it's better than that, but some of it...
I may walk that back in a minute.
Yeah, sure,
it sounds fair for now. Yeah.
But when the question is always intentionality. So you're asking, how do you do this? My methodology, which isn't necessarily the best for everyone, but you just walk it steps backwards. You try to figure out why that line, why those chords, why this music video in this way. And when you start finding that the answer to that question at every step is, well, money, or, well, because girls in this age range buy that stuff because of this weird inferiority complex,
well,
like a Katy Perry situation.
It's not always that.
No, but I think...
So sometimes pop music does resonate. I mean, you said one of the great things about music is that it may remind you of a particular person in your life or a particular experience, and you get an emotional response out of that.
Sure.
And, a lot of pop music does have that resonance.
Right.
It may not be Katy Perry's personal experience in those lyrics, but those lyrics may still resonate with certain folks.
Which is, I think, part and parcel of the problem, because if those lyrics are resonating with you, then you've been played by a billion-dollar corporation, and you're a 13-year-old girl.
I don't see it that way.
How's a 13-year-old girl supposed to stand up against a billion-dollar corporation feeding her what they know has worked on 13-year-old girls for 50 years?
Not all of it is leading them to destructive behaviors. Again,
but some of it is, and shouldn't we be looking for the stuff that is?
It is, sure, yeah. So there's, and I think it's actually encouraging that there are artists over the last, 10 years maybe that are in the pop sphere. They probably didn't write their own lyrics. They probably haven't experienced these things, but the music is still empowering for girls.
Sure.
It may be a small voice and a much louder chorus, but there are artists that are doing that.
So the cynical interpretation of why that's happening, right? Is follow the money, follow that money train, man.
But both things can be true. It can be profitable,
sure,
and resonant.
Absolutely. Yes. And we'll get into some of my favorite things here in a minute that are both popular and have resonated with people. But I do think, and that's why it's very important to draw the distinction that just because something is popular, just because something does resonate with a lot of people, doesn't mean that it's inherently brain dead or inherently nefarious or trying to get after.
I think it's good you got that on the record, because I think, that's the criticism most people have, I think, with music snobs, is that as soon as something becomes good, it immediately becomes, as soon as something becomes popular, it immediately becomes not good anymore, not cool anymore. And so it's almost like popularity is its own definition of bad.
Right.
And so it's good. Yeah, I mean, that's not true.
And that's completely not true. That's a perfect segue. We'll jump back into more of the thematic elements here, but that's a perfect segue into the guilty pleasures thing. We're gonna try to share with you because I think it is important to draw that distinction. There's plenty of stuff that I like that is popular. There's stuff I like that I would admit I don't think is that good. And I think that's okay too, to have an understanding of this is a thing I like. This is a thing that brings me joy. A perfect example of this, the movie Transformers, for me. That's a thing that when I flip on Transformers, I have fun. I enjoy the hell out of that. Robots turning into cars, thank you. Yes, please, take my money. And I had that stuff when I was a kid. I love it. But I would never say, what should be nominated for an Academy Award for the best movie of the year? Transformers.
Isn't it sometimes though, like in visual effects or some of the things that you might actually be like? But I understand the point.
Which again suggests to me that we all intrinsically understand that some stuff is better than other stuff. If we didn't,
based on our own definition of good.
Well, sure,
which is a subjective.
There
definition.
wouldn't be movie reviewers. There wouldn't be music reviewers. There wouldn't be movie and music magazines or entertainment coverage in general if we didn't all tacitly agree that some stuff is good and some stuff is not so good.
Well, I think that people look to those critics for different things.
True.
It's like, you go going into, like, that critic is not going to positively review Transformers.
Right.
But if you're in the mood for a movie that might be harder to find, isn't the summer blockbuster, but you're just in a mood for a more heady movie, that might be when you start, seeking out the opinion of critics.
Sure.
And to talk about analytics, one of my favorite things to look at are like Metacritic.
Sure.
Some of these aggregators.
Yeah.
Because, any one critic,
yeah.
Again, because I don't think there's any subjective or any objective definition of good.
Right.
So if I'm going to look for other people's
and neither
opinions,
do I
want a cross-section.
Yeah, right.
And of course, some individual reviewers, like, if I read enough of their stuff, then I start to be like, okay, like, this person kind of sees the same things I see, has the same interests, so then maybe I would start to hone in on one review or another. But in general, I don't.
Right.
And it's also one of the interesting, helpful things, like on Netflix or something. As you rate movies, it starts to know you.
Yeah.
So that kind of thing I find helpful.
Yeah.
But in general, I think that critics exist to do a specific thing, no doubt. But I still don't see them as arbiters of good.
They oftentimes aren't. And that's another thing. I always find myself in this weird place where it's like I have to defend the critics, even though I think most of them are completely full of bullshit. And so that's not necessarily the position I want to hold. But I think the idea that job exists at all suggests there is some work to be done in spooling through what a thing is and trying to uncover why it is the way it is. As a musician, I understand that everything I created is a decision-making process. There's a thing that didn't exist, and then I picked this chord. Why did I pick that chord? Because it felt the kind of feeling I wanted, whatever it is. And if that chain of why is broken up by things like, oh, they clearly didn't have the money to do the special effects well.
Yeah.
They didn't have an actor that was good enough to do what they needed in this place. They didn't have, the musicians can't play advanced technical stuff. If that is part of the decision-making process, I think it will come through in the final product. And there's a reason we pay people to pull those things apart to find the why.
Right. And so, again, they add value in all the ways that you described. But yet, even like, that movie that was a little under budgeted in the special effects, or like that guy clearly didn't know how to write a good score, think the editing was loose, whatever. All those things can be helpful. But the thing can still be good or bad because of other elements overwhelming the whole, the storytelling or the, whatever. Right. A singular performance by a good actor can overwhelm the whole, or it could just be the kind of, we have this term like B movies, all these movies that we agree would fail in every one of those measures, but some people still find good.
Right. and maybe it's a terminology difference. Maybe it's good and not good should be replaced with something like, I don't know, well done or well crafted versus not well crafted.
I like the term well crafted.
Well crafted. As a beer drinker, I sitting here at Whiskey Bar in Lower Downtown Denver. Come on down.
Whiskey Bar.
Thank you, Whiskey Bar. I love drinking craft beer, and the lady friend and I, we go searching for the newest, best, weirdest beer we can find. But sometimes you get a 30-pack of PBR because you're broke and it's the weekend, and
Right.
And it's not that PBR isn't good. PBR is better in some cases than not PBR.
I'm glad you went there. I was going to make the same point. I mean, yeah. How
some
many like
shit's actually poisonous, and you shouldn't drink it to extend my
right. But yeah, like how many like 80 IBU IPAs can you drink in a row before you're just like, shit? Not just because it's cheap, but because I need to give my body a break. Yeah. I need a PBR.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So each and I like beers of both sorts. I like movies of both sorts too. Sometimes it's fun to watch Transformers and so we're talking about like guilty pleasures. So,
yeah.
So I heard so an artist I really like. I heard he was on his tour, Bryan Adams. So he's on tour, and I heard that he has covered a Bryan Adams song.
Oh, sure.
Which is funny, because
why wouldn't you?
Yeah, they're
just way too
close names, people whatever. But so one of my guilty pleasures, I love Bryan Adams. I also like Bryan Adams.
Oh no.
and sometimes it is just because Well, first of all,
it's true.
Well, all right, so there's the love songs, and I do love. I like sassy love songs. Maybe I was foreshadowing this in some of my comments earlier, but some of those pop love songs are resonant. They're generic. They probably resonate with everyone, but they've resonated with me. I remember so
I could play that Bryan Adams song on
my first dance. So now I'm going to hone in on my age.
Oh yeah.
So my first dance was in 7th grade. And I remember the love song that year was Bryan Adams' theme to Robin Hood, Kevin Costner's Robin Hood.
That's my jam.
Right. So I have Bryan Adams holds a special place in my heart just because of a certain song that came along at a certain time.
Right.
So I don't like people backing up Bryan Adams. And the other thing is, so most of his songs are in that space, and we all know what they are and aren't, I guess. But Summer of '69, have you heard Summer of '69?
No.
So Bryan Adams. So if that song will never get a fair shot just because it's Bryan Adams.
Sure.
But it's actually it could be a Ryan Adams song. I think that's actually the one he covered, and I keep hating myself for not having looked this up. But I could see him covering that song because that song it's a good piece of songwriting.
Yeah.
And,
I feel that way about Brad Pitt.
If Ryan Adams had come up with that song originally, or any other number of officially credible artists, it'd have a totally different legacy than it does as a Bryan Adams.
Right. No, I feel exactly the same way about Brad Pitt as an actor. There was that time where to some people, he's always going to be the pretty boy from the 90s who married Jennifer Aniston and then Angelina Jolie, and that's all they're ever going to think about Brad Pitt. But for me, it's 3 or 4 of my top 10 acting performances of all time were him in weird movies that either people know Fight Club, but people don't necessarily know 12 Monkeys or Snatch. And or Seven was another.
Yeah, right. That was brilliant.
People remember Seven, but it's just one of those things where to the wrong crowd, it's association is a huge part of how we value art or don't. What it associates you to, what it brings you back to. There's stuff I know that's good, that's well crafted. We're going to have to get our terminology. I know there's stuff that's well crafted that I don't like because it hit me at the wrong time in my life. I saw a movie and I was in a terrible mood. Something bad had happened, and I went to this movie and I didn't enjoy it. Now every time I see or think about that movie, it just reminds me of this crap time in my life. But it was a good movie. You know what I mean? But it's not that guy's fault. One that always drives me nuts with music, I'll hear this one a lot. People will say, yeah, that song's okay, but it's so overplayed. I liked it at first, but it's on the radio all the time. It's that artist's fault. Coldplay phoned up the radio station and said, would you play our track on an endless loop until it just pisses people off beyond
we think
no
your listeners
return?
need to hear this more, right? No, and that's totally true. That gets into it's another version of that same thing. Once something's become popular, it's also not good anymore.
Right.
Whether too much
sold out
thing.
Remember when Green Day sold out and Linkin Park sold out? Everyone's sold out.
Yeah, right. Yeah, selling out. Yeah.
Yeah.
And now everyone's trying to get their songs into commercials.
I've been trying to sell out for years.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Someone buy me. I am for sale.
And maybe that's partly a product of it's hard to monetize music, which is another big problem.
You're telling me.
So, it seems maybe that's why that's died out. Because I don't seem to hear that as much anymore.
Yeah.
For good. I'm glad we don't hear that.
I'm glad we don't, too. But part of me worries it's because everyone just buys into whatever is popular is good.
So
it's just everywhere now. It didn't used to be that whatever was the #1 hit song of the summer was just everywhere. You go to the ballpark, they're going to play Bruno Mars 1,000 times this year, and then whoever, it's just every single day at the ballpark, the same 6 songs. If you go to the mall, I don't go to malls, but really,
so
there's a lot of good music out there.
Right. No, and I had a conversation with my brother-in-law recently on this, because we were in a house and there was this painting on the wall, right? And it was mostly just the color orange with like kind of one line through it. Different shades of orange. It kind of faded off to one end. And my brother-in-law, really smart guy, and worked in a gallery in college. He's not like an art critic or anything, but he was, working in the art gallery, he was kind of told kind of the more technical aspects of art. This is, sometimes we don't understand what the artist is trying to accomplish here. And he kind of learned how to see more. Again, he would not claim to be whatever, but so he does know, quote unquote, a little bit about art. And so I asked him, honestly, why is that art?
Yeah.
And so we had this conversation about the technical aspects of art, and we got into, who decides this is worthy of kind of crossing the threshold from what anybody could just throw out on a page and actually be marketable and put in a gallery and be presented as art. And the conversation ended up going into pop music. We, crossed over, so to speak. But his point was so part of it is this, if you keep seeing the same thing over and over again and told that it's this thing, then you'll start to see it as that thing. Or pop music, the earworms, so to speak. That and one of his contentions is, he's kind of with you on this one, is that pop music is not, the degree to which we consume it and buy the records is not actually even a reflection of how good it is or how much it entertains people. It's really just a product of having people beaten over the head with it.
Right.
And that the more, eventually, you may hear this song, you may not like it the first time, the second time, the third time. By the 6th time, you're going to start to bounce your head to it. That doesn't mean it's good. It just means that it's gotten to you. That's perhaps the best example of what he was trying to say. And again, I'm not wholly convinced by that argument, but there is something to it.
Yeah.
I guess what I would say is that's also true to me with what we would consider to be artistic music, well-crafted music, whatever our substitute for good is. That I hear a song and I'll hear it the first time. I'm like, oh, that's pleasant melody, whatever. I might catch a lyric or two that I like. But it's not till the 6th time that I hear that song either that I fully appreciate it.
Right.
So I think that dynamic's at play.
Isn't that a different process, though? Isn't one of them growing to learn something that's amazing that you couldn't totally understand the first time because it was complex and nuanced, and the other thing just giving in, just giving up, just raising your hands up and saying, if they're going to play this god-awful song everywhere I go, I might as well dance to this nonsense?
Well, if there is a difference, I guess I'm not conscious of it. Maybe I'm part of the problem.
You, Ryan Hammon, you are the problem. You are the virus.
Well, I'm glad we're able to answer this question, to resolve this issue.
Now that we know
I'll try to be better.
Right. So what other? I mean, let's just throw out some guilty pleasures. Just list for them, rapid fire. Just for fun. What do you like that sucks?
Avril Lavigne.
Yeah.
So, all right. So I mentioned this earlier. So I think Avril Lavigne, I can actually make a case that she's important, quote unquote, because she's one of these artists that actually would she was for one of the first artists sort of popularizing breakup tunes, kind of fuck you, I don't need you, type of breakup songs, which Taylor Swift does a lot of now. But also, I'll be honest, that's not the real reason. The real reason I like her is because back in high school, that was the girl I was into.
Yep.
Skater girl. I don't care if she actually skated or not. If she looked like a skater girl or dark makeup, that was the girl I wanted to go out with. And so the product, the package, and again, I think pop acts I do see as a team effort, but the team effort of which she is the face, I'm buying that.
You're in. You're on the Avril Lavigne train. I love it. I'll switch mediums for a minute. I'll do Twilight.
Okay.
The films. I never read the books. I come on, I wasn't going to put that much work into Twilight. But I waited till a lot of the hype was pretty much where the fighting had pretty much been over. Most of the movies had been released to even watch anything. I was like, okay, the people who love it had their day, then the people that hate it had their day. Yeah. Now I'll hop in. And I was expecting them to be god awful, and they really weren't. The films were, there's a big hump I think you've got to get over right at the beginning of Twilight, which is, do you buy that these two people are madly, deeply in love? If you never buy that her and the vampire, her and Edward, Bella and Edward, if you don't buy that they're deeply in love, none of the rest of it's going to work. It's all going to be kids being stupid. But if you just like, okay, let's just pretend, okay, they do understand mad, deep love, and they do have this affection for each other. The rest of it's actually relatively compelling. I found a lot of the history, the different takes on the vampires and the werewolves to be somewhat interesting. And I will say unequivocally that the music in those movies throughout is spectacular.
Right. Well, that seems to be something that a lot of the movies that are appealing to the younger generation have been doing really well lately. Is tying in the right song at the right moment. Right. The Fault in Our Stars movie. Have you seen that?
No.
All right. So do you know The Fault in Our Stars? It was a book. So it's a book about. It's told from the perspective of a young girl who's trying to figure out how to set this up without giving away the end of it. Because I certainly don't want to do that to you people.
Yeah. Spoiler alert.
But anyway, it's told to great effect. Kind of this. It takes you through the emotional process of a teenage girl who's struggling with cancer, and is also kind of going through a romance. And the characters, I think one of the reasons the story
seeing
succeeds.
The previews for the movie now.
So the characters are just very much more believable than the typical teenage characters are in movies like that. Partly because the writing in the book is so great, but also the actors just pulled it off.
Yeah.
One of those things where
it's the young woman who's in Divergent.
Yes, right.
Okay.
What's her name?
I can't remember.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Anyway, so the music in that movie, again, right time, right song. It's good stuff. That seems to be important these days, and something that movies are conscious of doing. Well.
Much more than they used to be, for sure. You want to hit us with another guilty pleasure of yours?
I'm trying to think of a movie. I'll dip my toe back in the sports. So, For Love of the Game.
Okay.
Which a lot of people deride as a horrible sports movie because
it's
really
mostly
more
not.
That's
right.
Also, Kelly Preston is really annoying in the movie. She plays the female lead.
Oh, yeah. Shailene Woodley.
That's right. Yeah. Thank you for putting that up. So yeah, For Love of the Game. I've watched that movie 30 times.
Oh no.
Okay, so so since I kind of became aware that most people thought this movie sucked, I've been watching for the criticism. And again, Kelly Preston is really, and I've tried to watch it and see her as an annoying character, and I can't do it. And I'm wondering if there's just something wrong with me. But anyway, but also the actual baseball action in that movie is really good. And Kevin Costner for all.
Isn't Vince Scully doing the play-by-play?
Yeah. Vince Scully's in it. The actual in-game action, the hitting, because a lot of baseball movies, even movies that are good, the actual
most sports
baseball,
movies, the on-field action is terrible.
And Kevin Costner, for all his critics, he pulls it off. He actually he's good. But all of the smaller characters, the kind of the wordplay. The sequencing, the order in which events actually unfold, all of the little stuff, a baseball geek would
be into.
They do it right. So anyway, for sports movie fans out there, don't dismiss it just because it's a romance and just because and make no mistake, it is a romance.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest problem. My favorite Shakespearean quote that I use all the time in these conversations is, "Expectation is the root of all heartache." I think so often we dislike things, and this is great for all the stuff we've been talking about today. We'll dislike it because it's not what we thought it was going to be. I think that's exactly why I didn't like For Love of the Game, and I haven't seen it in 10 years probably, because I thought this was going to be a baseball movie, and he spends 2/3 of it chasing this girl around. And I'm sure now I'd like it a lot more because I care about girls. I was probably still at the point when I last saw that movie where I didn't even care about girls. Why would I even care about the romantic thing? Now I'm sure I'd find the romantic plot far more compelling, having been through something in my life.
Yeah. Give it another shot.
Yeah. I'll throw another one out there. Garth Brooks.
Okay.
And I've written down here, and to a lesser extent, Keith Urban. But because country music tends to be my least favorite genre, I always want to point these ones out because I do think there's a lot of great old country music, old Hank Williams and that kind of stuff. Modern pop country is mostly just god-awful terrible. But
they're pretty formulaic.
It's pretty formulaic. But there was some pretty good Garth Brooks stuff when I was a kid, and it's, a lot of it's just as formulaic as any of the rest of it, but For me, this is why it's in the guilty pleasures section. This is one of those things, even as an art snob, I have to sit there and go, I don't know. It just worked for me. It was pleasant to me. I could sing along with all the words to the rodeo. And
yeah, right.
Papa love mama, mama love man, and all kinds of, it's not my scene. It's not my style. But I think it's important to be open to stuff that isn't yours so that it might get in there. And Keith Urban is sort of the modern day of it, where I don't own any Keith Urban albums. I would never go buy that. But I've heard him play, and the guy can really play the guitar.
That is the thing. A lot of those guys are legitimate musicians, even if the lyrics aren't always all that.
John Mayer's a great example of that.
Yeah,
John Mayer is half
right.
unfathomably douchebaggery, just top of the bro chain of people I would never want to split a beer with.
Separate the art from the artist.
And the other half, but some of that spills into his art. Some of his lyrics about, hey, girl, I was in a motel room with you 3 years ago, and I don't even remember your name, but thanks for letting me put myself inside of you. Yeah.
Right.
But I don't even remember you. Thanks for
at least he says thank you. Right?
Yeah, right, exactly.
No, I hear you say, so country music isn't my favorite genre. One of the things I like about country is that it a lot of the songs do unfold and kind of they're telling a story through the lyrics, and the lyrics aren't complex.
Right.
You don't have to think hard to understand them. But there is kind of an act 1 and the verse 1, and then act 2, and then things get resolved by act 3, and sometimes there's a twist.
Right.
You realize that's what he's talking about.
I'm turning around.
I'm talking about my daughter, but no, actually I'm the daughter. And I'm making fun of it now, but actually I like. The country songs I like them for their simplicity and the storytelling aspect. But I don't have to work really hard to unravel. And if you pair that with a nice melody and whatever, I can deal with that.
That, in a weird way, is going to feel like a strange segue, but that reminds me of exactly the way I feel about Family Guy, which I have on this list as a guilty pleasure. I'm sure there are people thinking, what are you talking about? That's not pop art. That's not Taylor Swift, Katy Perry, Garth Brooks. It's not. But to me, it is absolutely those things, because it is the intrinsic thing that ties all those things together for me is that they are brain off things purposefully. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not trying to be disparaging when I say brain off. Like I said, I love Family Guy specifically because it's a brain off thing for me. You don't have to have been watching the whole time. You can jump right into the middle of an episode, catch a few standalone jokes, and go back to doing whatever. It doesn't require you to think really at all to find it entertaining, funny, do whatever. So for me, I put it in the same category as a lot of these things, where I would draw a distinction. And this may be a good way to get to understand my position on art snobbery. I love Family Guy. I watch it all the time. I probably watch it more than I watch South Park.
Okay.
Because I can flip back and forth when I'm watching sports. I don't have to be as engaged. I specifically don't have to be as engaged. With South Park, for me, far better show. 10 times better show because of the amount of art that goes into the craft. The amount of craft that goes into the art.
Right. There you go. I like that.
The what now? However they do it over there, and I'm sure there are illicit drugs occasionally involved, but whatever they're doing,
I do like this well-crafted as a substitute for
yeah,
I think we should...
because Family Guy's good. Family Guy's great, but South Park is exceptionally well-crafted and thought about, and you have to think and engage with the material in order to fully understand it.
I agree.
And I think we were talking about that with music earlier. The pop song that beats you over the head versus the thing you learn to grow and love.
Yeah. Again, I have to think a little bit more about how the extent to which I agree with how different that is. But no, I
totally set you up there. No, you have to agree with just agree and move on. Just agree.
No, by the way, like how you enjoy Family Guy. That's actually, despite the fact that I write a lot about heavy, gory math on a baseball blog, most of the time I consume baseball, it's with mind off. And I enjoy it for a lot of the same reasons.
Yeah.
You know, this is a opportunity to kind of disengage, and our brains work really hard in general, and usually that's a good thing. As humanity in general, if we didn't use our brains, that'd probably be a problem. But our brains do need lunch breaks,
right?
And
absolutely.
Right, so.
And that's when I pop on the Transformers movie, or Family Guy, or listen to Coldplay or Garth Brooks or whatever else. Like I don't need to be challenged all the time. I think that's another, sort of caricature of the art snob, is that we're constantly going around saying, you're not allowed to like that because it doesn't challenge you. You need to think hard.
And you're always brooding and sad.
Yeah, exactly. That you're not allowed to just have fun with it. Same thing with analytics in sports. You'll hear people say, just watch the game.
Right.
Just have fun.
As if a person isn't capable of doing both.
Exactly. And I think we will find that is a common theme on this show as we hopefully continue. I'm sure this will be the last episode. We finally got one recorded. Episode 1 and only of Crossover on the Baller Mindframe Network. But yeah, I think that's going to be a common theme throughout the show, is that usually somewhere in the middle is where the truth is. Right?
And hopefully you'll find the art that we produce here well crafted.
Hopefully, and if not, of course, you're wrong. Your opinion is wrong.
That is the takeaway.
All right. Do you have anything else to add before we shut this thing down?
Sign off.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for listening. We appreciate it. Hopefully, we haven't alienated anybody who might tune in to episode 2. Take care.